Interesting from this Owen character, he sent another memo to Ollie North back in 1986, just before they okayed the $100 million for Contra-Gate. And this is what it said. You may have heard this before, but I think it's worth repeating. He said, quote, this is to Ollie North from Robert Owen. He says, "I care and believe in the boys and girls, the men and women who are fighting, bleeding, and dying. But the reality, as I see it, is there are few of the so-called leaders of the Contra movement who really care about the boys in the fields." And he emphasized this part. "This war has become a business to many of them. There is still a belief that the Marines are going to have to invade, so let's get set so we will automatically be the ones put into power. If the $100 million is approved and things go on as they have in these last 5 years, it will be like pouring money down a sinkhole."
Let's talk about Contragate.
Certainly.
Some people, particularly the media and a lot of the Congress people and senators, say, well, Contragate is behind us, it's, things are worked out, shows the system is working, and we should put it behind us and go ahead and continue in the future, etc. Other people say Contragate is an extremely dangerous threat, constitutional threat. What's your opinion on this?
Well, there's no question about it. The nation is undergoing one of the most serious, if not the most critical, constitutional crisis since the Civil War. You have a heedless president, callously indifferent to the Constitution and the limits placed upon the executive branch by that document. He ignores the Congress. He has violated every single principle that America basically stands for. He has ordered the assassination of foreign leaders he doesn't like. He has killed by an executive decision that exceeds his power under the Constitution. Up to now it hasn't been exerted that way. He has killed and caused to kill innocent children and women and civilians. He has invaded and suborned and attempted to pervert the nationality, the sovereignty and nationality of independent sovereign nations such as those in Central America and elsewhere in Latin America.
Grenada.
He has violated 3 of our solemn treaties, some of which we initiated ourselves. He violated not only 3 treaties, but 2 of our statutes with the invasion of Grenada. He didn't consult Congress. And for the first time in our history, even during the Civil War, the press was prohibited from being anywhere near the invasion. Even during the Civil War, you had the reporters covering the carnage. And for the first time, the president was acting as if he were a British official or prime minister. See, we in America don't realize what it means to have the First Amendment. If you will remember some of the complaints by the hard right-wing hawks who never had any children to send to Vietnam and could abide the poor and the powerless being killed with quite a bit of indifference, actually saying that the press was covering one side of the Vietnam conflict. We were just seeing the atrocities of the American soldiers, and we weren't covering the atrocities of the communists. And that the press was exceeding its proper role in even being anywhere around, forgetting that this is an undeclared war. The press, if it is a free press, cannot be bridled under the First Amendment. But in England, there is no First Amendment. Everybody forgets that. So if you will remember the Falklands affair, you read about the sinking of the Essex and the death of about 300 British sailors 3 days after it happened, because the Minister of Information was controlling the release of information. You didn't have any reporters anywhere near the scene from England. They're prohibited. There's no First Amendment in England.
They have their Official Secrets Act, too.
And they have the Official Secrecy Act.
Anything they want to say is secret, and that's it.
That's it.
But it goes a lot further than Reagan, though. We talk about a constitutional crisis. According to the Christic Institute's information and trial, they have what they call a secret team of people from the Pentagon, people from the CIA, inside the CIA, outside the CIA, sometimes both, working with sometimes civilians, businessmen, etc. They have been carrying on assassinations, illegal arms trades, and actually dealing with drugs for decades.
There's no question.
Long before Reagan.
Well,
What is it you know about this, and is Congress aware of all
well, there's no problem. There's no question that the problem has been very basic since every war brings evils that are inimical to the democratic processes. If you will remember, after World War I, you had the Attorney General's raids, the Palmer raids, and you had the anarchists that were supposed to be loose, and you had celebrated trials and the attempt to deport people like Emma Goldman and the like. And there was a period of hysteria. And there was no question that some of the laws that had been, or powers that had been delegated to the president, mostly the Espionage Act of 1917, and many of which were not recalled to the Congress after they had been constitutionally delegated to the president. And one of those powers has enabled presidents in times of what they define as emergency or perils clear and imminent to the security of the nation to invoke everything from arrests to imposing embargoes. Presidents don't have any power other than that, which in this case the Congress has delegated, and going back to the Espionage Act of 1917, so that when you have a declared war by the Congress, all of these laws come into play. If a war had been declared during the Korean incident, the Vietnam War, none of the demonstrators that demonstrated would have been released at any time. They'd have been jailed immediately and kept in jail as aiding and abetting the cause of the enemy. But we're living in these twilight eras in which these things have not been defined. The American people haven't defined them through their elective officials in the policy-making body known as the Congress. So that when you have a president such, the thing that makes it more difficult and dangerous is that in the person of a pleasant, smiling, agreeable, popular, almost charismatic individual like Reagan, you have a very dangerous situation because the powerful men who surround him and are actually making the judgments and the decisions are shaping whatever it is that leads to an action. I won't call it a policy because there is no such thing. Whereas in a case of, say, Richard Nixon, even his strongest supporters had some misgivings about him. And his character was such, his personality was such, that there was a residual fear and distrust. In the case of Mr. Reagan, since these are faceless, powerful individuals coming from the most powerful corporate, financial as well as corporate structures in the world, you have a very different and dangerous situation. It is men like J. Peter Grace who are defining who's a communist threat in Central America, because it's he, the billionaire, that owns the conglomerate that now owns the old United Fruit, now known as Standard Brands, that literally has owned and continues to own Honduras, which we're occupying. So that when you have that dangerous wedding of the unelected, nameless, faceless, shadowy figures, but nevertheless powerful enough to dictate the actions, the nation is facing one of the most serious constitutional crises because there's no accountability. the Iran Gate, Watergate, and the Tower Commission before it is very disturbing. Because as the Tower Commission very eloquently brought out, I was surprised it did even go that far. You have a country rudderless with a leader who doesn't even know what's going on in the basement of his home.
You were saying a while ago that Reagan is really controlled, or the reins of the system are really controlled by higher corporate officials and all. Does this mean that this renegade secret team is really doing the bidding of the people higher up in the American power structure then?
Whether they're doing the bidding or whether they're doing what they think pleases, what they feel is the power that be, is something that you can debate. When I say that Reagan isn't really, I said this from the very beginning, that Reagan wasn't lying to the country. He was saying, look, I've been an actor, and I'm asking you to elect me to act the role of the presidency. And he has. I said what disturbs me is that Reagan has always been an actor that requires a 3x5 cue card. In other words, he needs script writers. And it's the script writers that worry me, because I saw the names. I had been chairman of the ad hoc committee on the Robinson-Patman Act, the Magna Carta of the little businessman in the Nixon administration that was trying to kill it. And we had extensive hearings over a period of a year and a half. Men like Baker, Meese, Clark, all of those appeared. They were all involved one way or the other with the Justice Department or the Nixon administration or the private business entities out to kill, which they have literally killed by now, the Robinson-Patman Act. So when I saw these names as the coterie surrounding, or the little oligarchic group surrounding President Reagan, now there's no question, I don't think anybody debates that Reagan is shallow intellectually. Any man, it's dangerous for America at a time when the world has shrunk, where the world is totally different. Latin America, Southeast Asia, and other parts of the world, Europe is no longer the Europe it was upon which our defense policies and our $315 billion defense budget is predicated. And that's the 1947 Europe. Yet, Reagan's mindset is a 1947 Europe. Latin America, in 1982, he went to 4 of the South American countries. In one, he said, well, I'm glad to be here, and he mentioned another country he hadn't visited yet.
Yeah.
When he returned to California, right immediately after that trip, his first remark was, my golly, I didn't know those countries were that different. America can't afford to have that kind of leadership in its most critical period of development in a world that has shrunk. And it's fatal. And it's costing us, and will continue to cost us much in both treasury as well as blood.
So what we have here is a blueprint for American fascism, and the sharpest critique of the Reagan administration and Oliver North that I have read was by Alexander Coburn, and in these Times, in an article entitled Homegrown Fascist. And I want to read these first few sentences because I think he hits the nail on the head. Coburn writes, Oliver North is a true memento of the Reagan era, and indeed of the president himself. He has Reagan's own capacity for the vibrant lie, uttered with such conviction that it is evident that formidable psychic mechanisms of self-validation have in that instant convinced the liar, Reagan, North, that what he is saying is true. But on display last week in Congress was something more disturbing than the mere deceiver. Rather, the cocksure, edgy, ingratiating profile of the all-American 1980s-style fascist. The fascist has absolute moral assurance that this lawfulness is lawful, that though he gets things done, he is following orders, that all the impediments in his path, legal, moral, are obstructions erected by hostile conspiracy. Coburn points out that whenever you have a colonial war that is lost, you have the breeding ground for fascism. The Germans lost World War I, and the right wing in that situation accused the liberal Germans of the stab in the back, of betraying the German nation, of not carrying out the war with enough efficacy. And this was sort of the seed bed for the fascist movement that produced Hitler and the Nazis. After the defeat of France in Vietnam and then Algeria in the 1960s, you had the beginning of a homegrown fascist movement in France, where their military defeats gave charges to a stab in the back and the need for stronger military adventures in the future. And Coburn suggests that the American defeat in Vietnam produced the same sort of fascist mentality in Reagan and Richard Secord and Oliver North and all of these people that came to light in the Iran-Contra affair, that felt that the U.S. was stabbed in the back by liberal media and Congress, and that you need a more resolute group that will carry on U.S. foreign policy outside of the confines of legality, of Congress, of morality, etc., where a secret team of real warriors will do the job and will get around all of the wimpish restrictions. And that's basically what was going on in the Iran-Contra affair, that this group of homegrown fascists had more or less taken over the government. The most frightening aspect of this, and this is the first time I've read this story, indicates the same time that Oliver North was beginning to serve in the Reagan administration and was writing up this Federal Emergency Management Agency plan, this FEMA, he was also the guy who was in charge of what they call the football on the National Security Council. That in 1981, he had been assigned to carry the football, which is the briefcase for carrying the plans for fighting a nuclear war that accompanies the president wherever he goes. So Oliver North was carrying this briefcase with all the codes for, starting the nuclear war, that if the, emergency took place, it would be North that would open the briefcase, and he and Reagan would start punching the codes into the computer. And Coburn comments, those who like thinking about the unthinkable might ponder this parable of impending nuclear disaster. A president who has frequently expressed the view that the apocalypse may occur in our lifetime, trailed by the football-carrying North with his own history of mental instability. Reagan, North, all of these right-wing fascist Reaganites believe in revelations. They believe that the apocalypse is at hand, that the time will come when the cleansing of evil in the world and the defeat of the devil will take place through some sort of apocalyptic explosion. And they saw nuclear war as the possible way of eliminating the devil, carrying out the apocalypse, bringing on the millennium of the reign of Christ on earth. And it's really frightening to think of Reagan and North having this fantasy at a given moment that now's the time to carry out the apocalypse and open the football and punt away.
Yeah, WW3 will give us JC. Thank you for joining us on Alternative Views. Alternative Views is a presentation of the Alternative Information Network, P.O. Box 7279, Austin, Texas 78713.